frustrating parts of environmental work and thinking about zoning and permitting and stamps of approval that facilities need to move forward. For those of you who don't know us, we're Fair Shake. We are an environmental law and justice nonprofit. Most of the work that we do is provide no cost and low cost legal representation in PA, Ohio, and West Virginia. And I'm super excited to have two of my attorney colleagues here with me today. Tim Fitchett, who is our supervising attorney and licensed in PA and West Virginia, as well as Andrew Early, who is our West Virginia staff attorney. That's incredible work. They do such good work. And we know the law cannot solve all of our problems. And so from there comes our community democracy work with Sean and Anaya and the rest of our team, helping communities find organizing strategy and policy levers to move their goals forward. And for folks who are interested in the law or are students or who know students, we are always working with hopefully future attorneys and organizers and change makers through internships. So feel free to have them reach out. Because I get to work so closely with lawyers, they always make sure that we have our wonderful disclaimer in here. I'm not a lawyer. Tim and Andrew are lawyers. But being here today does not mean that we are providing legal representation or have a legal client relationship. Tim, anything else to add in with that disclaimer?
No,
Beautiful.
no, we're good.
All right. So why are we here today? I know that figuring out what are the stamps of approval a facility needs to move forward is incredibly frustrating and hard. Last month, we talked all about the bureaucracy, and now we're kind of building off of that, right? If we know what the layers of bureaucracy are, then we can figure out how do those bureaucratic layers work together to approve or deny different facilities. So we're going to spend our time today talking about zoning and what zoning is, and really getting our fingers messy in what we should look for when we're looking at a zoning code. And then we're going to shift to state permitting and kind of do that same exercise and really figure out, from Andrew's perspective, how do we read those really complex legalese, complicated, confusing documents? I'm going to put a couple of links in the chat. So if anybody's interested in kind of some more visual representations or written representations of all of these different stamps of approval in real life, we've got a couple of resources and blogs that we've written for various facilities, but I know I need always like a concrete example to help me understand these situations. So feel free to take a look at those and we'll dive in. I know for myself, zoning and permitting, it can make me really feel like I want to pull my hair out, digging through the legalese, websites, numbers. It's just not how my brain works. And like I said, we really want to help folks get kind of messy and fingers and just like taking a deep taking a deep breath before looking into these. And we're going to be using Mentimeter to kind of help us dig into these things today. So if you are able to, I think it'll probably work best if you have a phone next to you and can scan the QR code that you see on here, or feel free to go to menti.com and type in that website. We're going to be using the same Mentimeter throughout the day today. I'm going to have two questions now, and then we're going to be using it throughout our time. I also know technology is technology, so if it's not working for you today, no sweat, no worries. This will just be kind of for fun. So go ahead and join us there. And I'll give folks just one more second to join us on that Mentimeter. And it looks like there's lots of folks there already filling out that first question. And we want to know where you are at. So Tim and Andrew and I and Fair Shake, we work mostly in the Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia region, but we're always really excited to talk with folks from across the country and learn collectively. So it's really exciting that we have folks from lots of different places. So please feel free to chime in because we always learn a lot from folks on the call. Thank you so much, Matt, for putting that Menti info in the chat. Really appreciate it. We'll give folks just another minute or two to tell us where they're from.
Hmm. See somebody in the chat mentioning other people in Oregon, and I was excited to see that as well. I lived out there for a decade, so good to see some Pacific Northwest representation.
Beautiful. And yeah, feel free to put specifics in there and connect with folks who live close to you that you don't know yet. Love it. All right. And then we need to know why you're here as well. I know a lot of folks on this call, and I know the issues that you're working on, but please chime in. Kind of what are those issues that you care about or are currently working on? I knew data centers was going to be the first one up here. So we've got data centers, we've got housing, we've got more data centers. I'm seeing semiconductors, clean air, stormwater management, urban farmers, more data centers, oil and gas, and obviously everyone here knows that how integrated and intertwined these issues are. So definitely encourage us all to kind of figure out and continue thinking about how do these things all link together and how can zoning and permitting really help all advocacy around all of these different issues. Thank you all so much. I'm glad Mentimeter and technology was smiling upon us today. Let's head back to talk about zoning. So last month, we spent a lot of time talking about the bureaucracy. And for those of you who weren't here, just real quickly, we really like to think about bureaucracy like an onion. I hate onions. I think they're gross. They make me want to cry. I think they're very smelly. They're hard to peel and kind of work with. But if you cook them up a certain way, if you deep fry those, maybe in some really good batter, good dipping sauce, like I can make it work. And bureaucracy and our government can kind of feel similar, right? Can make you want to cry. It can be hard to work with. But if you know how to work it, you might know how to kind of like move your issues forward a little bit more. So, that being said, in the very middle of the onion in our analogy is you, right? You are the seed that makes the changes grow. Without that seed, without you being here today, without you caring about waste and data centers and environmental justice and petrochemical issues and waste issues, those issues, the things that you care about, are not going to move forward, right? So, when we think about our onion, at the middle is you and the things that you care about. So let's head on to the outside. The outside layer of the onion, this is the federal government. They're on the outside because whatever rules and laws they have to make have to be followed by everyone else. They are this outermost ring. So they have decision-making power over things like money and taxes and foreign affairs, and they give money to the states to operate federal programs. When it comes to environmental decision making, the federal government mostly creates baseline standards, right? They set those baseline standards for example, how much pollution can be in our water or air. They can provide guidance to help state permitters. They sometimes do some environmental permitting, especially for like really, really big things or things that cross across state borders. And they're kind of creating the vibes, right? They incentivize the conditions that help economic development move forward. So that is our outermost layer of our onion. When we move inward, the next layer is our state. Our state is under the federal layer, which means they have to follow the rules and laws and regulations that the federal government creates. So as long as their rules and laws don't go against the outermost ring of the onion, they can do things like create state taxes, licenses, they oversee elections, they set up local government. For environmental decisions, this layer has a huge amount of decision-making power, right? See how thick that layer is in our onion? Because they take those federal baseline standards and figure out how to meet them. And they do this by regulating the industry, right? So they are the ones who are giving or denying permits for construction. They are enforcing permit violations if those happen. And again, they're going to be creating incentives, right? Lots of tax breaks, maybe to court certain types of economic development. So as we continue moving inward, our next layer is our county government. They typically have power over public health, courts, records, 911, sometimes public works, solid waste, and they have to follow the rules, standards, regulations from their outer layers, right? So they have to follow county and the federal rules. When it comes to environmental decision making, they definitely have some influence in decisions, but look how thin that layer is, right, of the onion. When it comes to environmental stamps of approval, there may be some, but not as many as the state and as we're just gonna about to look at our municipalities. So our municipalities are the most inner ring. They are that nice thick layer, right? These are the cities and boroughs and townships that we all live in. And municipalities have power over things like police and fire, parks, public works, water, sometimes things like transportation, community health, and deciding how land and space can be used, or zoning, which we're going to dive into. Because they're the innermost layer, whose rules and laws do they have to follow? Counties, states, and the federal layers. But let's take a look at our onion right now, right? The municipality is one of the thickest because it holds a lot of power when it comes to community-driven goals. We also know that they're the closest to us, right? So we have a lot of physical and emotional and cultural closeness with those municipal officials and can make change happen a little bit easier than those layers that are further away from us, right? It's also the smallest layer, which means that they can create change a lot faster than county, state, and federal bureaucracies. Now, I'm by no means saying that municipalities are quick and maybe make change as quickly as we want, but if we compare it to those other layers, they are the smallest and most able to make change and get things done quicker. We're going to kind of think about moving up the layer to state permitting, but zoning is a very, very critical and important tool, and it is not a tool that's going to solve all the problems, right? Zoning historically has caused things like redlining and some of the housing issues and some of the disparities that we see, racial disparities, environmental injustices that we see. It has been used for bad. It continues sometimes to be used for bad, and it can also be used for good. And so kind of figuring out how to work it and what currently is there and what could be is definitely a really important piece of the puzzle. Please keep digging into your zoning. And like we said, zoning is not the only stamp of approval that facilities need to move forward. So let's continue in our bureaucratic onion and think about state permitting and what that looks like and how we can get, if we thought zoning was confusing and confuddling, like let's really get even more confused and confuddled thinking about state permitting. So, Andrew, I'm excited to hand it over to you to help us take a deep breath and take a look at some state permits together.
Well, as someone who's regularly confused and befuddled, I'm glad to talk about permitting with you all today. The first time I looked at an air permit, I may have well have been cutting an onion because I cried right onto my keyboard. And these things are really technical, um, loaded with lots of scientific language and legal language, and are not in any way written to be accessible to general members of the public. Um, Aside from having legal training, I don't really have a scientific background. I studied philosophy in college and then went to law school. So I've had to try and figure out how to make sense of all of these hyper-technical terms. I want to talk to you guys a little bit today about what that process has looked like for me, so that hopefully when it comes to looking at permits in your own communities and in your own states, you can try to figure out what trying to work through those permit documents might look like. Before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about permitting broadly, because there are so many different types of permitting. Um, Three of the big categories of permitting on the state level, I would say, are water, air, and waste. And all of them are vastly different from each other. And the additional fun wrinkle to that is that they all look different in different states. Um, when thinking about permitting on the state level, it's very important to remember that while states have the authority to do most of this work, there's so much federal overlap because most of that authority comes from federal laws and federal regulations that the states are then implementing in their own way. Um, and that system of federalism works in some ways well and in some ways not so well, particularly for local advocacy in terms of changing what that process might look like. So to go through this, there's no way that we could possibly talk about all of these types of permitting in 90 minutes, let alone kind of in 15. But we're going to try and like take a quick look at some pieces of a draft permit to highlight kind of the process that I was talking about that I go through, and then also to think about what that might look like in your own little sections of the world. So I think we're good for the next stage. The first thing that you have to do when you're thinking about, oh my God, what's a permit, is find out about it. It's not always easy. You don't hear about a lot of the environmental permits that come into your backyards the same way you might something as like massive and publicly notorious as a data center. Certainly data centers have to go through the permitting process, but they, because seemingly not very many people really like them, it's easier to find out about them than it is something um, that's more run-of-the-mill in the industrial world. So for our three states, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio, there are different ways in which you can get notice of a development that might be coming into your community. For Pennsylvania, there are a couple of different websites. There's the one listed in there, and there's also the PA Bulletin. For West Virginia, we have a kind of subscription to a mailing listserv. And for Ohio, you can navigate their website and look at them, and you can also sign up for permit tracking. I believe the same is true for Pennsylvania, where you can sign up to track specific permits. What I do in West Virginia, I am subscribed to every county's listserv for all of their permits. If you want to punish yourself in your inbox like that, feel free to. But what most people I know do is they sign up for the county that they live in or the counties that they are most concerned about so that they are, paying attention to what's coming in that way. And the reason that it's important to really stay on top of these public notices is because they are what allow the public to be part of the public participation process of the permitting um, process. Um, and that is important because it's really your only shot to get involved in permitting. So when that comes out, in West Virginia, at least, we usually see the public notice, which gives you notice that a draft permit has been issued by our state Department of Environmental Protection, and you have 30 days or so to comment on that facility before the state agency makes a final decision about whether it's going to grant the permit. Um, in those 30 days, you are tasked with the really unfortunate and monumental challenge of understanding all of it. And that's where it comes to the like, okay, what do I do with this public notice? And so there are like three kind of key documents that if I could only look at these three documents, that's what I would go to look at least in the air world. And it's going to be the draft permit, the um, industrial developer's application for the permit and the engineering evaluation that kind of states what the agency did to evaluate the application when it drafted up the permit. And this is an example of an engineering evaluation or fact sheet for the facility that we're kind of going to be taking a little bit of a look at. Data centers have been getting so much noise, no pun intended, but this facility is a natural gas power plant that is almost definitely going to be used to power a data center down the road. Um, Megan, if you could show the application too. Yeah, that's it. Um, and so the applications are, this is actually a very short application because this developer redacted a lot of information in their application. They're usually about twice this length, and they have tons and tons of information about the process, the emissions units that are going to be part of the facility, and the um, amount of pollutants that are going to be emitted. Uh, these documents, all of these, like, are how you figure out what is happening. So for me, I hear natural gas power plant, and like all that really kind of clicks for me in my head without going and doing more research is like I see some flares in my mind's eye, and I think about electricity, and that's really it. But there's a lot more going on underneath of all of that. And that's kind of what can be found in these documents here. The way that I go about getting past the very shallow knowledge of my own mind's eye is with the internet. I am so frequently just Googling different words that I come across that I'm like, I don't think I know what that means. And we'll talk a little bit about some of that as we go through this. Um, the frustrating part about this is that like I can't talk about this for every single one of our states because all of the applications look a little bit different for each state. The air applications look a little different from the water applications. And the same is true for kind of every stage of that process. But I think what is true because of that federalism that we talked about earlier is that there's so much overlap that if you can kind of think about what you need to figure out, that's going to give you a good lens into your own state's documents. So this is the cover page for the draft permit that we're going to be looking at today. Um, and there are, I think, a couple of things that are important about this document. But the most important for me when I'm looking at a permit in West Virginia is this R133713. And that tells me that one, this is the number, the permit number. So if I'm searching for it anywhere within West Virginia DEP's database, that's the number I'm going to be utilizing a lot. Um, the other piece of it that's important for me is the R13, because that tells me that the West Virginia DEP is looking at this as a minor source of air pollution as opposed to a major source. That's important because it really can change the way in which the facility is regulated. Major sources are regulated more heavily than minor sources. And so communities have better protections when something is a major source instead of a minor source. Um, you'll see in the top right corner, page 3 of 21. Again, like this permit is actually shorter than a lot of the ones that you would usually see. Um, but there are a couple kind of key pages that like I'm like, okay, this is where I would really start. And as with anything, I love a table of contents because that's where the organization is. And so we're going to take a quick look at a few of these documents in here. The emissions units, the table of contents. The emissions units are important because those are the things that are actually going to be producing the pollution that comes into our communities. The general conditions are usually kind of like blanket terms that apply. They're boilerplate. They go into each and every permit for the most part. There are some changes, and sometimes you'll see like something that says reserved because it just doesn't apply to this facility. Um, what I really, when I first started looking at these, I spent a lot of times with 2.1 and 2.2 because of the definitions and acronyms. And then the next two sections that are pretty important are the facility-wide requirements, which are this is where you're going to see a lot of your monitoring, record keeping, reporting, and testing requirements. And those are the things that help you figure out what the industry and agency are doing to check whether this facility is actually complying with its permit, actually staying in line with what it's lawfully allowed to do. There's a lot of overlap in that with the source specific requirements, and that there are going to be certain things within the source that are they get a little bit of an extra coverage. And these also are going to generally apply to those emissions units that are talked about a little bit above. And now we'll go take a look at kind of some of those emissions units. Um, One of the reasons I picked this is because it's actually a relatively simple permit, and that there are not that many emissions units. It's really the combustion turbine and then a few storage tanks and where they do the diesel truck unloading. Um, So in this kind of column, I actually don't really love charts and graphs that much. My eyes tend to glaze over them, but the each column, has a piece of important information. The IDs um, are helpful because you'll see that shorthand in other pieces of the document. And so, like, if you don't really know what the acronym means, you're probably going to glaze over it, but you can refer back up to the table to help find that. Um, my favorite section on this chart is the emissions unit description because it reads like the most plain English. Even if you still don't know necessarily what a combustion turbine is, that's like, oh, I can just like put that into Google and learn about what a combustion turbine is, or your browser of choice. Try DuckDuckGo sometimes too. The design capacity is really important because that helps you figure out what this is a term of art, what the potential to emit is. And the potential to emit is important because that helps figure out whether it's going to be a major source or a minor source. These are really kind of, I think, they get technically pretty complicated pretty quickly. And we lost Megan. Um, can everyone on here still hear me? Okay. Um, when I'm thinking about what the um, design capacity is, I want to talk to an expert because they understand those things so much more than I do. Even if I can go Google it and figure out what the thermal units mean, I still want to talk to an expert about what that potential to emit might look like. Um, I am going to try and take a quick second to figure out if I can share the slides here because they're really going to be helpful.
Megan's internet dropped, so she should be back short in a second to
Okay. Yeah, mine is
PowerPoint back up.
buffering fairly slowly, but I think I've got it just about ready to show.
This work?
Yeah,
Where exactly were you?
down at the uh, further down here. Perfect, this will work.
Okay.
Could you go back up one real quick, Tim? The last column on this section of slides is the control device, and these are really important for an air permit because the control devices are what are usually, attached in some way if they're physical control devices that help limit the amount of pollutants that get emitted by the source. And I Google these all the time because I don't know what SCR means off the top of my head. And so you go and you figure out what that means. And then the other piece that you want to try and figure out is, does this do what they actually claim that it does? And I think a kind of fun analogy here is like intent versus impact. So for a lot of these, you'll see claims that it's going to be 99% effective at reducing the emissions from this unit. But then if you go and like look really kind of take a deep dive, you might see that that number is actually closer to 90%. And that 9% difference can make a big difference in the potential to emit, which then makes a difference for whether this gets classified as a major or minor source. We can go to the next slide, Tim. The This is the table within West Virginia's draft permits that shows those maximum aggregate total annual emissions for this specific emissions unit. Um, And these are really helpful to look at when you're just trying to get your head around, like, oh my gosh, is this a major or a minor source? Because the numbers are right there. And without getting too far into the weeds on this, there's like different thresholds for major and minor sources. For this specific facility, I'll just go ahead and tell you that the major source threshold is 100 tons per year for criteria pollutants. And so when we're thinking about what the criteria pollutants are, we're seeing those listed in 4.15. It's the nitrogen oxides, the carbon monoxides, the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds, your particulate matter, and sulfur dioxide. The other kind of category of air pollutants are called or are called hazardous air pollutants, and they are regulated with a different threshold. Um, so those numbers are really, really helpful for figuring out kind of quickly like how much of this stuff is coming into the air around me. And we can go on to the next, Tim.
Real quick, I'll just throw out that like when you see this kind of thing where it's 99.35, that might be a place that you really want to look because oh my goodness, 100 tons per year is the threshold, and somehow this comes out at 99.35. Somebody may have fudged the numbers just a little bit.
Yeah.
Something just to
And
like keep in your mind.
I think that's especially true when you're thinking also in terms of the efficiency of the control devices that they're applying to the unit itself.
Mhm.
And do we have Megan back?
Megan's back.
I'm back.
Did you want to run the scavenger hunt?
That sounds great. So beautiful job, Andrew, helping us think through like what are some places that we should initially look at to kind of have a baseline understanding about what a company is proposing to do in our neighborhoods. And we know, again, it's still hard and abstract. So, want to spend just a few minutes taking a look at a permit together. Um,
I'm gonna give it back to you, Meg.
yeah, if you can get back to me, that'd be great.
And while we're waiting, I'm just going to quickly plug to learn more about permitting, keep paying attention to the Thinking Like a Lawyer series, because like I said, there's no way to cover all of this in one session, but we're going to keep talking about it and uh, learning more.
Awesome. All right. So we are going to go back to our beautiful Mentimeter on your phone or a separate screen. And then if everybody can pull up that link, this is the full permit that Andrew just kind of walked through a little bit. Can I get like maybe a thumbs up or just like type in the chat if you have the permit and you're on the Mentimeter? All right, beautiful. Seeing some thumbs up. So folks are there now. Thank you. All right, so let's take a look at this. Go ahead and take a look at the permit and would love for you to find what page number the maximum aggregate total emissions table is for the combustible turbine. As a hint, this is just the chart that Angie was walking us through. So Big scary words, but go ahead and look at that table of contents to try and find what page are you going to be looking for to find that emissions information. What are those air pollutions? Um, and where can you find those? All right. So I'm seeing a few folks entered page 14. Would love for one of those folks who entered page 14, can you tell us how you found it? Because that is the correct page that we can find those on. Would one of you three mind coming off mute and sharing how you found that?
So this is the Hazelwood team, and so the way we did it was we did look through the table of contents, but then we just scrolled through the pages.
Beautiful. I love it. Fantastic answer. Um, thank you so much, Hazelwood team. All right, let's keep digging into this permit. So, which of any of those sources listed on the chart on page 14 do you think crossed the major source threshold? Somebody was real quick with none. So, looking at that chart on page 14, which of any of these pollutants do you think is going to cross the major source threshold for this type of facility? Any other thoughts? All right. So, for this facility, none of the pollutants listed on that chart kind of technically cross the threshold. Andrew, I know this was really confusing to me. Can you talk a little bit more about like major, minor, and how it may be, there's not like a necessarily a standard number, but it may vary between different types of facilities?
Yeah, so under the Clean Air Act, there are criteria pollutants and hazardous air pollutants. And the criteria pollutants have a major source threshold category that's either 100 tons per year or 250 tons per year. A certain number of types of facilities have been determined to be just like so kind of ubiquitous and so problematic that it was decided that they would be regulated at that 100 tons per year threshold. This facility is a natural gas power plant that will be producing electricity. And so it is one of those facilities that would fall into that 100 tons per year threshold. If you're not one of those specially listed types of facilities, you fall into the 250 tons per year threshold to be determined as a major source of criteria pollutants. Hazardous air pollutants are hazardous in more ways than criteria pollutants. They are just all very clearly harmful to human health and ecological health too. And they have a much lower threshold. It's 25 and 10 tons per year are the thresholds there.
Thank you. By no means will any of us be experts on any of this. If you are, please reach out to us because we need experts who can help us and communities. But please, really the goal here again is just to all help us take a deep breath, and recognize that, here are some things that we can gravitate toward to learn more to kind of figure out how these can impact our communities. All right, last question. And there is no right or wrong answer here. We're curious from you all because we know that there are some folks who have done so much amazing air advocacy in their communities. Kind of how do these different pollutants concern you and worry you? Everybody has 100 votes to give, and you can split those 100 votes up however you want across the board between all of these different air pollutants. So feel free to just spend about 30 seconds or so sharing how concerned these various types of pollutants make you. All right. So definitely seeing kind of that total hazardous air pollutants, particulate matter, and volatile organic compounds rising to the top for a lot of folks.
We can see you moving now, Meg.
Oh, was that, could you hear me talk?
No, you
Oh
stop.
my goodness, what is happening today? Any thoughts about how these concern levels are breaking down from you, Tim or Andrew?
Um, no, man, it looks, I mean, it's really hard to say. I mean, they're all dangerous,
Yeah.
right, in their own ways. And they all cause different issues. And, carbon monoxide is just straight poison. Sulfur dioxide smells terrible. Nitrous dioxide creates the haze and the ozone that, makes it look really smoggy. Particulate matter and asthma. And then hazardous air pollutants are just gross. So, like, they all just kind of have their own different effects, and we don't want any of them. That's why they're all regulated.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that that's one of the reasons that which pollutant concerns you is going to be very dependent on your community and your own health risks. Like, some regions in the country have different standards because they're not what's called in attainment for that specific pollutant. And if you're, in one of those places, you're going to be a lot more concerned about that specific pollutant, probably.
Okay. So thank you all for playing along with our bingo and scavenger hunt games. Um, It's again impossible for any of us to be experts on any of this. I'm hoping that Andrew and Tim at least made you feel slightly better. Like they also don't necessarily consider themselves experts or know exactly what they're looking for at every permit that they're looking at. And that's okay. And kind of recognizing that even among that, we can all kind of use our strengths to advocate for the things that we want, using these levers and tools to help us move our and push levers to move our ideas forward. Please feel free to reach out. This is a lot. We will kind of upload all of this to our website and I will send an email out to everybody. Our couple next steps that you are welcome to join. Next Thursday at this time, our partners, Black Appalachian Coalition and Alliance for Appalachia and us are doing our learning circles, which is just kind of smaller group to kind of dig in, dive in, collaborate, brainstorm, troubleshoot together. And please register for that. We've got our pro bono data center legal clinic coming up next Thursday. And then next month, March 19th, is really going to tie the last 2 months together in terms of now that we know how the bureaucracy works and what stamps of approval we need to be on the lookout for, how do we make sure that our voice is an important part of that process through commenting, public meetings, and rights to know? Um, So please join us for that. If you don't know us, again, reach out. We're always happy to chat with folks. And before you leave, we always have just three very, very quick questions just to make sure that this is helpful and we can be as helpful as possible. So if you can do one last Menti, that is always appreciated. And we just really appreciate all the work that you all are doing and spending the last hour and a half with us. And enjoy, hopefully, a little bit of maybe sunshine and warmth wherever you are. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for being here.